I'll kick off the call. Thank you all for joining, especially with the change to Thursdays for this call. And as a housekeeping announcement moving forward, this call will be on Thursdays. We apologize for the late notice for that this week, but yeah, please keep that scheduled. I'll start with our standard disclaimer. Nothing on this call should be considered investment or any other type of advice. Everything discussed is purely informational and for educational purposes for the Sky ecosystem community. This week, a lot happening across the ecosystem, so we didn't actually have a specific weekly deep dive other than a Q&A with Rune, who should be joining us shortly. Otherwise, it'll be a fairly short call. But before we get to the Q&A with Rune, I will do the usual overview of weekly highlights across the ecosystem, plus a quick look at the various dashboards that we use for transparency purposes. So I'll jump straight in with our weekly highlights. Last week, we actually talked about the Sky simplification process, and one of the outputs from that was the monthly settlement cycle. So I'm glad to report that's actually gone live. The first report is on the forum. It really provides an overview of the settlement values for the first prime agents, so Spark and Grove, for the supply side allocation primitive and also the demand side accessibility rewards primitive. So these reports are a first run. As they iterate, there will be ever more transparency and also granularity provided. But it is a very important one to watch. The monthly settlement cycle represents an important revenue line, both for Sky and the agents. And at the end of the process, funds are settled into the surplus buffer for Sky and also the sub-proxies for the agents. So that link live on the forum to look at closer. The second call out for the week has been new listings and new markets for Sky. I think especially appropriate considering the upgrade penalty being voted on, I guess, as we speak in the executive vote. So Binance joining a long list of partners to list and support Sky. And we also saw Hyperliquid listing a new perp market. I'm assuming soon to be followed with a spot market, especially considering all the talk of moving the buyback mechanism onto Hyperliquid. The third call out for the week are proposals, and I really will emphasize these are proposals until approved by Sky governance, but proposals for diversifying the collateral allocation. And you've seen two come in this week, both from the prime agents, Spark and Grove, both in their relative or respective areas of expertise, and both very different in nature. So the Spark one, which I believe was actually voted on today, proposes to allocate to a delta neutral strategy run by superstates, something very similar to Athena. And the Grove proposal proposes to allocate to a huge TradFi name from private credit, Apollo, and their private credit fund, or which has been tokenized by Centrifuge. So those two in the pipeline for review. And you sort of see the agents bringing into the ecosystem new proposals that move up the risk reward curve and so offer higher yield. But of course, that comes with very specific legal, technical, market, and other risks that need to be evaluated. Which brings me to my next talking point of the core council. And it's something I've recently had visibility to. So the core council sits as a supervisor with a very strong mandate for risk management to really in my interpretation, sort of monitor the progress and health of the ecosystem and act accordingly. So these proposals are something that will go through the core council, where they will be evaluated across all the various risk criteria and decisions then taken. And one outcome that I can share, since I've had highlights come to me from yesterday's meeting for the core council, was a request or an action to amend the atlas to raise the required risk capital for the Athena exposure by 1%. So I always like to give a bit of context for these things. So I'm going to jump in and hopefully you can all see the atlas. But currently, the risk parameters as defined in the atlas for risk capital, and you've got a great definition of risk capital here in the atlas. So the risk capital is what's held by the agents to protect Sky from potential losses on these investments. And the risk capital for Athena, you can see it's currently defined, and hopefully you're all seeing my screen, as 2% for direct exposure and 3% for non-direct exposure. So the core council, in its capacity of monitoring the health of the ecosystem, has reviewed this and has put forward an amendment to raise these risk parameters. And so we'll accompany that progress as it sort of works its way through the process for getting the atlas amended. I did want to quickly call out, and we won't go into it now, but just sort of the depth of transparency that is available in the ecosystem. There is a star monitoring dashboard that does provide all the real-time analytics for required risk capital and total risk capital, and we'll certainly jump into this to better explore this in another session. So I'll sort of just pause there for a second, because I think just from those first four points of what I sort of see falling into place is, with the monthly settlement cycle, the first stars really using these prime primitives, the allocation primitive, the accessibility to rewards primitive, reporting on it, being rewarded for it. With Sky, we really do see it, Sky establishing itself as the sole governance token for the ecosystem. You see the agents researching and filtering the best risk reward allocation opportunities in the market and bringing that into a simplified core structure that remains very focused on supervision and risk management. And I say this as a contributor, and this is my personal opinion, but it really does feel like what has long been talked about as a future vision for endgame and launch all seems to be coming together as an operational reality. So that vision, is falling into place, and we're all learning about this new operational structure, but it's all there with full transparency to accompany. Which brings me to my next point. I think it's all happening in perfect time. It really does enable scalability that I don't think we had before, as new stars get added and can sort of parallel add new opportunities and drive demand. And if you're an old timer like me who spends more time reading Bloomberg than crypto Twitter, something that's been very evident over the last week, and actually, probably over the last few months, is just how excited TradFi is now becoming about our ecosystem, especially the stablecoin space, the tokenized space. But it seems almost unanimous that as we sort of come to this 300 billion in total value locked in stablecoins, there's sort of no doubting that this is going to the trillions. Perhaps the only area for dispute is how quickly and how big is this actually going to become. And I think it's sort of, this represents the next stage of our journey to see where does Sky position itself within this really exciting ecosystem. We all know it's a very unique and sophisticated project, and some of the comments I've seen is, how do we tell the story? How do we, really portray what this ecosystem is to this wider segment? And I think, I've sort of been reflecting on that and really felt like info.sky.money is the tool to support any storytelling. Not only does it support the story, it actually highlights really well just the superior transparency of the system with real-time on-chain data points at a level of granularity that is, it's just really impressive. And anyone accompanying some of the talk for US markets and actually reducing the frequency of listings of financial statement reports for companies, you just see the complete contrast to where we are in DeFi with this real-time capabilities. So talking about info.sky.money, I'm going to jump straight in for the dashboards review part of our session. And I'm going to start with, as we looked at last week, the Maker to Sky upgrades. I think somebody called this out on the forum, 82%, still going up, I believe, and somebody can correct me who's more involved on the chat if I'm wrong, but the penalty will actually go live on Monday if successfully voted in, or around Monday. And that will mean there will be an amount of Sky tokens, which are effectively, I believe, at the disposition of governance to decide what they do with. They will be forfeited for those who haven't yet upgraded their Maker to Sky. So something to keep watching. The other call out on info.sky.money, I did want to go back into the fundamentals, this ever so important tab, and also just mention that there is a lot of, as the ecosystem evolves, there is a lot of new features, granularity coming to this dashboard. I'm really hoping we can use this forum as a feedback loop, so please keep the feedback going. I've certainly passed a lot of feedback that I've already received, but we'll start just reviewing some of the core fundamental data. So expenses we talked about last week was actually nothing that's come in this week. So you can see the last expenses 10 days ago. Those were the fundings for the accessibility rewards and the simplification process. And we'll keep watching this. If the simplification really is happening as expected, we should sort of see that reflected in this expenses line. And as we talked about, expenses represent actuals. The income, which is where I want to deep dive in quickly this week, is a forecast looking forward 12 months based on a steady state of the ecosystem. And what's behind this number, you can't actually click in and see it, which would probably be helpful, but you can see it very clearly if we come into the collateralization tab. So the first thing to note on the collateralization tab before I come to the revenue breakdown is the total debt of the system, and you'll probably note that that's higher than the total supply, and there are good reasons for that. Not all of the technically minted stablecoin is considered stablecoin in circulation. There is a methodology for this, but things such as USDL held in PSM buffers, USDS held in the ALM proxy, USDS on Sparklen that's supplied by the Spark liquidity layer but not borrowed, are just some examples, and perhaps the more technical ones can actually comment further on that. But if we look at the revenue breakdown, you do have that level of granularity. And a lot of people have asked what's behind that number. You can actually see it crystal clear here. The core components, you see the prime agents, so Spark and Grove, and you can further click down to see all the detail. So if we use Spark as an example, they're still using a simplified accounting process that will be upgraded to give even more granularity here, but this is effectively the effective APY that Spark is earning on the debt. So that's a different number than what you see on Spark Data, the Spark Data Hub, and that's because on the Spark Data Hub, they're actually looking at the full, only what they've allocated, but the two do consolidate. So that's Spark. Similar for Grove, you've got an effective rate, and you can see that. And again, as they add more collateral types and as they move up the risk reward curve, you'll sort of see that reflected in the effective rate there. And everyone's probably more familiar with what already existed for stablecoins. The bulk of that coming from the light PSM with custodied with Coinbase, and of course the core vaults. Again, the level of transparency and granularity, it really just is quite something which I think is a USP for the ecosystem. But I won't go through it all, but I did just want to call out this new feature. And as we sort of have more calls, we keep jumping into various sections and keep bringing to the community all the new features that are being introduced to info.sky.money. And last but not least, the demand analysis that we always do. So this will be very quick. Another relatively stable week. I did want to call out, we've all seen the Fed announce the base rate reduction and further cuts expected through the year. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out in the DeFi markets. Athena still does have a premium versus, I think, with their SUSD offering at the moment. The one interesting thing I'll just call out on Athena quickly is just how much of their supply comes from Pendle. So whether it's USDE, and actually if I show the entire market first and just dig into Pendle, or with SUSDE, the Pendle markets are driving something like 60% of their supply. So make of that what you will, but very high concentration there with Pendle. For USDS this week, very similar to last week, with a slight increase in Sky savings, being offset by a slight decrease with token rewards. The Sky savings really has been driven by SUSDC, and I'm assuming as part of the new points campaign, which I've seen in socials, and also encouragingly by the other categories, so this long tail of users who were unable to identify smaller users. But yeah, over the last 2 days, that seems to have picked up some traction. That's been offset by Maple, which we know it's sort of very it's the allocation of idle funds, and it really sort of depends a lot on what they have idle in their system. The farms, you can see sort of coming down. It's a small scale with Sky, but Sky has been coming down and sort of some stabilization with the Spark Farm. So I think those are the main highlights, and I hope we have Rune, who will do his Q&A session. Okay, so Rune's just joining us on stage.
Hello. Yes, I'm here. Hey, is that is this chat the general chat? Is that a different chat if I'm opening the chat here?
And there's a community call dedicated chat, which...
Yeah, okay. Yeah, yes, great. Okay. Well, so I don't really have much specific to talk about because I feel like I've repeated kind of the main topics over the last couple of calls. There's just like one quick thing I want to talk about, and then I'll see if there's any questions, or anything specific people want me to address. Yeah, then we'll see where it goes. Maybe if we're lucky, we can end early. We'll see. So the thing I wanted to talk about was this. Well, so first of all, we have the so the concept of the core council is like slowly starting to form, right? And the long term concept is that you have these multiple executors, so executor agents, so like entire Sky agents with tokens and teams and legal structures and sub proxies and everything. and they, right, some of them, they manage they kind of provide a form of insurance around the stars. So there is this sort of compliance with the Atlas guaranteed for the stars with a check, the sort of a third party check essentially. And then they can rotate into the core council, which is when they become the same thing but for Sky as a whole. And then they sit on this core council, and basically it's like it's also kind of like a sort of a check and balance in how Sky governance works, basically. And one of the things this then does is it reduces the politics in Sky to almost only having to choose the core council seats. So it becomes sort of a big election where every year or whatever the interval is, you have to pick you pick an executor to be the next core council member, while an existing one they rotate off. So that's kind of like a long-term vision for how the core of Sky is regulated. The short run, it's a lot more like, I mean, there's basically going to be one core executor, and then there's going to be all the people I call the core aligned contributors, which are basically all of the people that are like regulators, bureaucrats, risk management, all this kind of stuff that basically aims to keep Sky holders secure and protect their interests, right? And ensure the stars don't do stuff that's like against the interest of Sky. And then now they're having these private advisory meetings, which are really a kind of, right, they're just like at this early stage, they're like very, they're still sort of relatively something equivalent to like relatively scrappy startup type of meetings or like forums where, you know, practical, like a bunch of practical stuff is discussed, right? So the core council is not yet anytime soon going to descend into complete bureaucracy. And by the time it does, it probably will be also like everything will be totally in public or nearly completely in public. At this stage, there's a lot of like need for confidentiality because a lot of the stuff relating to all the different stars is all about launching the Genesis stars and doing a lot of solid PR and announcements and first impressions and that kind of stuff. Yeah, but then the thing I wanted specifically, I mean, so that's all, I guess, I think that's interesting context in the sense of this is something you can really, like, this is like, this is the place where Sky holders essentially can indirectly have influence, right? At this stage, it's like, it's mostly indirectly, right? It's like it's through basically delegating, but over time, it's, there will be an ability to have direct influence by picking the actual core council seats, and then also just like by providing feedback and information, right, and opinions, which would actually be through this call, essentially, right? So this call over time should morph from like just updates and then like Rune Radio or sort of very just like this very the very particular thing it's doing right now. So over time be a lot more like this is the place where the regular Sky holders basically can interact or sort of react in particular to what the core council does. And then and also actually this is also where, because eventually there'll be lots of stars, right? And so one of the concerns is like unequal access to the core council or unequal access to sort of the core bureaucracy, where let's say stars that are built out of maker OGs, they get one track, and then people who are newcomers from outside, they have a more difficult time getting access and so on, right? So the goal is also that over time, as much as possible, the way that the core council communicates is through these like formal updates that are then also shared on this call. And it should be possible to like get on this call to kind of get access to sort of all the latest shareable information that isn't confidential in some shape or form. And then I just want to talk about one thing that like just an example of this process, right? So one of the things that that is like signaled as an intended proposal. I think so. Rajiv went through it, right? It's the tightening of the risk parameters around Athena exposure, where those the CRRs, the capital ratio requirements are increased by 1 percentage points on like each of the two types of Athena exposure that's currently covered by the risk framework. And the thing to call out there is that this is the kind of stuff where you have the core suddenly like changing the risk, the risk framework and changing how the risk management works. And potentially this could even be done. Sometimes this could be done in a sort of quite reactive fashion, right? Maybe there is some kind of actual serious risk discovered, and sort of drastic measures are taken rapidly, right? And in this case, there's no serious risk, but there is a chance. I mean, I think it was already calculated, and the conclusion is there is no impact, but there's a chance that this type of change could like adversely impact some stars, right? That's suddenly like, oh, now we have a bunch of exposure that suddenly got a lot more strict, and we have to delever, and maybe we have to, it will cost us a bunch of money to quickly fire sell these assets, and otherwise we might have to do it more slowly and then actually end up breaking the rules, right? So actually hold the assets that were suddenly marked as more risky, even after the change has been instituted. And then there actually is already in the Atlas some language that says that when somebody breaks the rules because the rules were changed on them, there should be like leniency towards this, right? So that's the type of stuff where it's kind of like a fine line to balance, where obviously like our goal should be to benefit the stars as much as possible, because then they make lots of money and then the whole ecosystem will generate a lot more value. But also the most important thing is to protect the system against risk, right? Because if there's some massive risk event, then everything can get wiped out. So it's like a balancing act of those two things. And the problem is, of course, also if you have this like leniency thing and you just like massively lenient whenever there's there's an opening for that, then that might also open up for abuse by stars, right? Who then decide to sort of deliberately, slowly rotate out of the assets that became marked as more risky. So yeah, I mean, it's just that's basically my the thing I wanted to talk about. I just like it's just like an interesting sort of very niche case of what the kind of the long-term governance and the ongoing sort of open questions of how to govern and regulate sky ecosystem. And basically that goes right to, so I see this question from Max, right? Could you clarify the primary mandate of this core council? So essentially this in some sense goes right at this question. Basically, I mean, I get it's kind of like a dual mandate, right? The number one is risk management. So the core council's main objective is to prevent, like serious implosion of all of Sky, right? Of like one part of Sky blowing up and damaging the other parts, right? So the philosophy should be that a star is completely welcome to like blow itself up if it wants to, right? But by doing some risky business or some crazy strategy or something, that's totally fine if it's provable that there's no way that can start damaging the rest of the ecosystem. And this is primarily, more than anything else, this is obviously about financial risk. So more than anything else, it's about managing leverage, setting capital ratios, approving collateral types. That's going to be most of the work, right? But there's also things like marketing and like reputational risk, right? So like stars like doing some kind of business that ends up somehow affecting other stars by being associated with them, or the sky ecosystem as a whole. And that also has to be regulated, because it's again like a case of something that will sort of cause damage beyond the star itself. And then there's like technical risk and legal risk and similar dynamic, right? So basically protecting against those risks, that's the That's the number one priority. And then the number two priority is then essentially growth, right? Or like sort of basically then ensuring like very high efficiency and preventing unnecessary bureaucracy and barriers. And that means things like extending the risk frameworks. It also potentially means developing actually just directly developing and growing and sort of improving the various AI frameworks. There's also something related to like essentially something like property rights. So like like dealing with disputes between, for instance, two stars that have some kind of had some kind of agreement and now they have a dispute, or even things like minority token holder rights in a star, right? Where you have, like, if you have a star where somebody has 51% of the tokens, they should not be able to rate the star and take all the assets, right? And all of that stuff should basically, like, the core council is sort of like the first place where this escalates to. And then the core council itself is kept in check by skyholders, right? So by basically skyholders controlling the composition of the core council, and even potentially can do what's called a whistleblower process, where in this scenario where the entire core council is corrupt or incompetent, the whole core council can be sort of replaced and dealt with if they make a very bad decision in order to overturn that decision. Then there's this other question about the Spark community call. I don't actually know if they do like a regular community call. I think it would be a great idea because it's like you have people in their Discord complaining about nothing's happening or like we don't blah blah. And then every time I talk to the team, it's just like the stuff they're doing is just like really, really impressive. But I think they do like podcasts and that kind of stuff. At least I've seen that on Twitter. Okay, there's one more thing to talk about related to the core council and its role, right? That you also have these other, you kind of have three major concepts that sort of play different roles that are very aligned with the core of Sky in the ecosystem, right? And then so you have this Frontier Foundation, which is like this sort of like very aggressive, like sort of future-oriented development, and that's also doing like it's also doing running the marketing and running the websites and that kind of stuff. And then the Fortification Foundation, which is kind of like the Fortification Foundation is kind of similar to, like, it has a role that's a little bit comparable to the core council in that it does risk management, but it's just that the Fortification Foundation deals with basically confidential and unquantifiable risk. That's like the type of legal and political risk where you sort of can't just openly discuss these types of risks and you can't openly deal with them. So that's kind of like in some sense, that's like the most important, not necessarily most important function, but it's like just an extremely crucial function, but it also sort of naturally, you want to draw as little attention to it as possible. So these three are kind of interesting, right? So Fortification is like confidential, unquantifiable risk management. Core Council is public, quantifiable, like sort of publicly AI-driven DAO type of stuff, right? Like very like maximally decentralized decision making, and compliance and verification. And then Frontier Foundation is this like growth and development and acceleration function. And the Frontier Foundation's role is actually potentially like it would not be a catastrophic risk for the ecosystem if the if something happened to the Frontier Foundation, while Core Council and Fortification Foundation are both extremely essential for the survival of the system, and there has to be like a lot of effort put into how to sort of de-risk their their roles and their processes, right? So you can sort of replace the Fortification Foundation and replace the Core Council, and it has to be possible to really kind of do that, because these two things, they are extremely important to have in place. Okay, next question here. So, can you give a brief overview of the hype drama and what you see next for Sky with it? So I'm assuming the hype drama means the thing around native markets winning the USDH vote. Is that what you're talking about? Yeah. So, I mean, well, I actually had tons of reporters reaching out to me about this. And my answer to them was like, well, I don't know anything about that. Like, I don't know. Like, I really, like, the only thing I can say is my impression was that I thought it was like an overwhelmingly supportive response that Sky got. So, from my perspective, I think, I think there was just like, I think the community was like extremely positive and very supportive, and like, I mean, as I understood it, one of the arguments for the native markets thing was that they were going to do like a big airdrop of all the tokens or something. Yeah, I mean, if it's like, I mean, the other thing is it's just a name, right? It's just a ticker. So like, but I think whatever drama like whatever ends up happening, and if there's like insider dealing and there's like drama and there's like, I mean, trust issues and all of the stuff that could happen as consequences of this, that's all something we should very much study and learn from, because we're going to have that kind of stuff happening, between the stars, right, and between the generator agents, and there's going to be a team that eventually takes over USDS, right, and it's very important that like, that's a much more serious sort of handover than just somebody getting a single ticker. There's nothing more than a ticker. Like, USDS, right, is like an actually massively established product, and that has to be done in a way that's like very fair, right, and transparent and handled proficiently. So it's good to learn from others' mistakes if there ends up being a bunch of issues. Right. Next question. Let's see. Okay, sounds like Core Council will play a pivotal role in the protocol's success. I'm fully supportive of bringing in committed members from the existing community. That said, should we also consider bringing in experienced external C-level executives who could offer strategic, unique insight and operational expertise and may complement what traditional crypto OGs bring to the table? Okay, so basically, the Core Council itself is actually where the kind of people that fit into the Core Council are like a very particular type of Sky, like extreme Sky nerds, basically Sky governance nerds. That is, I think, only this type of people, I think, only really exists in Sky. I don't think there's any other crypto community or any community of any kind really that has like managed to incubate this type of techno bureaucrat. So, but again, it's because it's like, number one, it's about risk. It's like about compliance, risk management, verification of stuff. So the Core Council is not doing things like strategic direction or anything like that, right? It's entirely like managing the bureaucracy and like managing processes and sort of deciding all sorts of like tiny details so that they're as fair as possible, right? And they don't create a sort of, what do you call it, like sort of governance debt or organizational or ecosystem debt later, where you treat one star one way and then it turns out to be you didn't think it through, and now everybody else wants to be treated the same way, and then if you don't do it, it's unfair and that kind of stuff, right? That's really the type of stuff you want to be able to handle properly and rigorously. However, the Frontier Foundation, that's where this type of, that's where there actually is an effort to like get, really like get things like TradFi experts and like strategic experts and so on, right, to support the project. And I mean, a good example of this actually happening right now is the ALCO. So the Asset Liability Committee, which is actually like that is the advisory body that assisted in getting the rating, the first ever credit rating of a stablecoin. And there is like so on the ALCO, yeah, there's like some really smart people, including like a very established TradFi risk professional who actually got onboarded onto called Murad Chowdhury, who was onboarded onto the ALCO because the original ALM framework that Sky adopted, or at the time Maker adopted, was written based on his books. And then they were like, wait, wouldn't it be cool if we like kind of get the actual guy who wrote the books to also like advise us, right? So now like he's actually been sitting on that, like he's been working on the ALCO and like supporting and giving insights for like more than a year now. 2 years might even be. So that's really cool to already be able to do that. But actually, Sky is still not like Sky needs to reach another level of maturity still before it really becomes like a great fit to be like, now we can fully engage with like TradFi people and sort of completely shed the kind of the need for the crypto culture, so that you don't get like kind of a, which is there's just still the case today. You have to have like an open mind. You have to have a kind of a crypto culture mindset. Otherwise, you're going to get extreme culture shock still if you try to engage with Sky. And actually, it's pretty amazing that we've managed to build up like a really solid AI team, despite all the AI devs. Like every single I don't know if there is such a thing. I mean, okay, the tech, like I know of a few, but like there's very, very few, crypto native AI developers out there, right? And even if you could get to them, obviously their price would be like unpayable, right? So you have to actually onboard and ramp up no coiner AI devs. But that is actually that's something Maker and Sky and before Maker was actually pretty good at always, despite our completely crazy culture, especially early on. And now it's like it's a lot calmer, but it's still, it's a very specific crypto culture. We've been good at like getting really accomplished people from outside crypto, and then basically turning them into crypto people, basically turning them into crypto natives. Yeah, including our extremely accomplished AI team. All right. Wait, now since I talked about AI this, AI that, and then I will just mention that what's coming out of it, what you need to look forward to from this AI team is the updated allocation system, right? So the AI-powered allocation system mechanism, which is, I can't say when it's going to come, but like it's the thing that it will really be a game changer, because it means every single star will get like an extremely powerful automated allocation system. So they all can, I mean, right now Spark is doing this stuff, is the only one, because that's also because of how Grow is currently not allowed to deploy into DeFi. But even when there's like multiple stars, I mean, and even the way Spark does it now is like a lot of it is manually done, right? And then we're building an entire system from the ground up that's going to be doing all of this in real time and using actually like cutting edge best practice of how to do this kind of stuff with what's known as neurosymbolic AI. So basically a bunch of different AI paradigms combined together to do this. So again, it's like super awesome. And I was going on for the tangent on like hiring executives and hiring people from the real world. So anyway, yeah, that's definitely a priority. And like I said, when it's a little bit more mature, we can really start to dig into this as it comes to integrating with TradFi. Okay, have you considered VE tokenomics for Sky? So right now, I have really been thinking about this over and over for so many years. It's one of the things that I have been sort of trying to figure out the most, and I think that it's so hard to come up with a good answer to. But right now, I believe what makes the most sense is basically having some kind of not too long unlock for all Sky staking. So you don't really have you don't have different categories of like super long unlock and little like short unlock, long unlock, super long, and then give different rewards based on that. But just have the concept of like if you stake, there is some kind of unlock. Period. It takes some time to unstake. So there's like a tiny amount of VE tokenomics, I guess. But definitely, like I think doing that, it definitely has to be different from ETH staking in the sense that that we have to prevent basically tokenizing, like creating, what do you call that, liquid staking tokens. Because if you don't deal with the liquid staking tokens, then basically you're very unlikely to sort of harvest much actual governance premium. And there's also a couple other things. There's this thing called the active voter rewards and so on. Like our goal should be to try to get actual independent humans, as many independent humans as possible, to independently like take a look at governance and conclude it's not totally screwed up, and then say, all right, seems like things are still fine. And if you actually have a lot of humans that are all not colluding together doing this, that's going to add a huge amount of security to the protocol, because over time they will be able to do this with quite powerful AI systems, right? So even if you're just a normie and you're just staking your Sky and you don't really know much, you'll be able to sort of have a little bit of there's a probability that you can avoid, using a corrupted AI or something like that, right? And as a result, you can actually get the truthful answer if something's wrong, and then you can speak up if something is wrong. And having a lot of those is very, very helpful. But that means that having liquid things that then abstract away the governance, like liquid staking tokens, can't be allowed. So there has to be some kind of slashing mechanism to basically slash stuff that tries to abstract away individual staking and abstract away the role of like how staking means participating in governance. All right. Key factor for yeah. Like there's no. Let's look at and learn from the hype drama. Okay, my last comment is like hype is just so strong and so powerful that there's like a stronger argument for like being like, ooh, let's go with something alignment and ooh inside the community and that kind of stuff. But I think for Sky, definitely, anytime we do something like let's open up some new thing, like a new generator, a new whatever, for sure. And I think this is always how we've tried to approach this. Is the goal should be to get the most competent and get something that's very external, right? So you take something that's very external and then you kind of integrate it in and you get something completely new. So, but again, I don't think it applies the same way to Hyperliquid because of how extremely strong the sort of endogenous power they have. Okay, yeah, bureaucracy. This is actually a really funny one. The word bureaucracy. So like you could call it many different things. I like to call it bureaucracy. But what's funny is that in Sky nowadays, like for sort of the insiders in Sky, bureaucracy doesn't really like it's just not as much of a bad word as you would think, because it actually works quite well. Like it's still, obviously there's so much like there's so many issues and so many process issues, right? And it's so frustrating to if you're creating a star and you're running into these issues that are never been seen before all the time. But overall, it's clear that like the one thing that's like extremely clear about the bureaucracy in Sky versus like any other bureaucracy you could possibly imagine is that it's working towards it's naturally working towards more transparency, better processes, smoother processes. And that's like completely unheard of, right? Like any bureaucracy usually is one that sort of makes itself more opaque. And I think the fact that that's clearly how it works and the direction it's going has sort of meant that like being a Sky bureaucrat, I mean, there's no such title, and nobody is like actually a Sky bureaucrat, right? But it means that that's not really an insult or like a bad thing, right? It's actually and this is essentially the entire value proposition of Sky. And we're basically trying to make bureaucracy that doesn't suck. Which that sounds really boring, but that's possibly the most powerful idea that exists in like human society, modern technological human society. Imagine bureaucracy that wasn't inherently terrible. If we can deliver that, I mean, we can unlock more value than any other system you could imagine. Okay, I would like to see something where I can participate all the skies. I'm guessing this means stars without having to pick which one. Who knows what the market will determine as valuable? Yeah, this is funny, but like basically, I mean, there could be like an index and stuff, right? But also stars will be permissionless. So are you going to include any random star that comes out into your index? Like somebody will have to make a decision around which ones are valuable and which ones are not. And this is like a crucial part of how this is really crucial to the sort of the theory and the paradigm of Sky, because the point was to sort of move governance into more tangible interactions, right? And one of the most important governance interactions in Sky is like choosing to buy or sell a star token, or even choosing to farm a particular star token. So unfortunately, it's kind of like your job is to pick the one that's valuable. You have to figure out which one is valuable, and then you have to buy it, and then you get rich if you pick the right choice. But Sky also benefits, and this is a way for Sky to sort of get people to provide it input without having to do soul-numbing politics, which is kind of the default direction that Sky kind of broke with. I mean, that's I guess the big break from Maker to Sky is to basically be like the governance cannot be done through this like large scale politics. Yeah, just farm Spark, and you can just farm all the Genesis agents. For the next couple of years, there will only be Genesis agents, and they will all be farmable, and you can just spread out between them. And they will all be like, all the Genesis agents are quote unquote vetted, right? Like they're all like good projects incubated by the Sky or ecosystem. And obviously they may not all succeed, but I think there's a low chance. Like if you just randomly pick a Genesis agent, or if you pick all the Genesis agents, you're not going to have like a lot of them being total failures. They're very, very solid teams and very solid business models. And yeah, so on Spark's valuation, right? So yeah, I think so. Spark has a profit of around 40 million. It could go down, like the revenue could go down when you get more stars, potentially eroding the spread. But obviously also Spark is like developing at a lightning fast pace, so it could also go up potentially. One other thing to consider is that Spark also will have to pay this so-called executor accord. So right now, Spark is sort of getting its governance for free, but later it basically has to pay the core for the governance bandwidth that it uses, as well as like the insurance that's provided by the executor. But I don't think, I mean, I don't know how much that's going to be, but it's probably not going to really affect the numbers much. And then the total tokens the thing you should use to like calculate the market cap, like the circulating FDV, is basically something like 10 billion tokens. It's probably a little bit less because they still have something in the foundation and they still have something in sub proxy. I don't really know how much, but I think at the current price, the PE ratio is maybe 12 or something, which implies no growth. So so it really depends on like what you think is gonna, like where you think the profits are gonna go. All right, we're at the top of the hour. Thanks everyone, and yes, I will be able to make it next week. So I will be here next week, and who knows, maybe there'll be some other stuff on the menu. Otherwise, we'll just do another Q&A as always. Right. See everyone.